Good morning, everybody. Coming to you from downtown Athens on this Monday morning. And I thought I would do a quick morning update. It was a rough weekend of news. Really rough weekend of news. And so let's just jump right into it and talk about the Russia-Ukraine conflict and some other news that I want to get out to everyone. So we had the news over the weekend that Biden called for regime change. And he also told the 82nd Airborne in Poland that they should prepare to enter Ukraine. But then he gave this big triumphant speech that was scripted for him and prepared for him. And at the end of the speech, he talked about how Putin should not be in power anymore, essentially calling for a regime change in Russia, which is really the main goal of the globalists and the neocons and the neoliberals in DC and in Brussels. Their main goal is to overthrow the Putin government and to get into Russia and to just create all kinds of chaos, whether that is economic chaos or complete balkanization and breaking apart Russia into 4 or 5 different countries, civil war, suffering. Well, it doesn't really matter for the neocons or the neoliberals. Their end goal is to get that regime change and then to destroy the country of Russia, and essentially to destroy its people as well as people, its culture, its heritage. I mean, this is a war. This is a war that the globalist class, the neocons, the neoliberals, the Brussels elite, or as some people in the locals community, in the Duran locals, refer them as the retrogrades. The elites are the retrogrades. But what they're looking to do is to destroy Russia and then work on China. That's the game plan. So anyway, I did a video on this yesterday, and Alexander has a video on this coming up today. It'll go up soon on his channel. And you know, Alexander makes an interesting point, and I kind of agree with it. And I will put a link for that video when it goes up. This video will probably go up first, and then I'll have Alexander's video up on his channel. So I'll put a link to that video after the fact. But, you know, Alexander makes an interesting point in that, you know, this was in that speech. He believes that this line calling for regime change was in that speech crafted by the neocons, by the Newlands, by the Sullivans, by all of these people, the Blinkens. You know, this speech was crafted as Biden's big heroic speech in Poland. You know, this was his call to arms, his declaration of war against against Russia, and you would say by extension against China. And they were hoping that this line calling for regime change and calling for the overthrow of Putin would have a different effect, that it would be a rallying cry for the entire world. Because remember, the parts of the world that are aligned against Russia right now are essentially Europe, the US, Canada, and Australia. That is it. And when you look at Europe, it's not even all of Europe. Let me say the EU, because Serbia is definitely not buying into this Zelensky is a hero, there are no NAZIs in Ukraine narrative. I mean, the Serbs are onto this. There's no doubt about it. They understand exactly what's facing Russia and what's and the forces that are aligned against Russia. Well, because they experienced this evil that was inflicted on their country back in 1999. So they know exactly what's happening. And even a country like Hungary and Orban knows exactly what's happening, because as Orban is part of the EU, as Hungary is part of the EU, Orban understands that it's the EU that is also sanctioning Hungary, because they want to get into Hungary and they want to destroy the country. They want to topple the Orban government. Remember, just 3 months ago, not even 2 months ago, the European Union was calling Orban a dictator. They were calling Orban the Hitler word. The very word they're using on Putin now, they were using against Orban literally 2-3 months ago. And by the way, they were saying the same thing about Poland as well. they were saying the same thing about law and justice. Just 2 months ago, they were saying that law and justice was a dictatorial, fascist regime. And they imposed sanctions on Poland, and they withheld grants and money to Poland. They were talking about imposing sanctions on Poland. They're withholding money from Hungary. They're talking about imposing sanctions on Hungary because Hungary doesn't play along with the EU line of things. And good for them, because the EU is on the wrong side of history on this one. There is no doubt about it. And so is the collective West. And I think with every day that passes, we're starting to understand exactly the evil that is being exposed in Ukraine. The evil that is being uncovered by journalists like Patrick Lancaster, who's there on the ground, and he's exposing all this. And I'll get to that in a bit. But let me circle back, as Jen Psaki says, circle back to Alexander's point that he was making. The point that he was making was that all these scriptwriters for Biden thought that this would be a rallying cry, not only for Europe and the collective West, for the EU, the collective West, and Canada, who are totally bought into the Zelensky is a hero narrative, but they believe that this would be a rallying cry for the rest of the world. Because remember, the rest of the world is not buying into this narrative. India, much of Africa, South Africa, the Middle East, much of the Middle East, much of Asia, they're not buying into this, let's go to World War III because Zelensky says so. Let's go to World War III because there are no NAZIs in Ukraine. They're not buying into any of this at all. And they saw Biden's speech as a way to get support from India. In other words, the people of India would say, yeah, Sleepy Joe is right. Let's go have World War III. Let's do it. Or people in South Africa would say, yeah, Sleepy Joe, man, he's our guy. He's right. Putin should not be in power. Let's take over Kaliningrad. Let's bomb Moscow. Let's put NATO into Ukraine, and let's go to war. But it didn't work out like that. It didn't work out like that at all. That last line in that speech completely backfired on Biden, completely backfired on the neocons and the neolibs and the EU Brussels retrogrades. And people were outraged by it. You know why? Because all of these areas that I've talked about, Latin America, that understand exactly what's going on in Ukraine, they get it. The people of Africa, the people of the Middle East, the people of Asia and India and Pakistan and all of these areas that completely understand what is happening in Ukraine and understand why this is happening and understand the history of what has been going on. They've lived it. They understand regime change. They understand that when Biden sits there and says he can't be in power, they know that today he's talking about Russia, but tomorrow he could be talking about us. And it also goes for the economic war that they've unleashed on Russia, or the cancellation of the Russian culture. The rest of the world knows that when they're done with Russia, if they get their way with Russia, then they're going to turn their attention on them. They know it. They've lived it. They've had it happen to them. You know, countries, all kinds of countries in Latin America and Africa and the Middle East and Asia, they've had the regime change turned on them. They've had the color revolutions turned against them. They've had the sanctions turned against them. So they know that that when Biden says this, that he's dangerous. And they know that this is the policy. They understand that this is the exact policy that they want for Russia. And everything they're doing to Russia, from an economic perspective, from a society, culture perspective, all the way to let's get engaged in Ukraine and start World War III. They know that this can be turned against their country and their people. So anyway, I will put a video to Alexander's video. I will put a link to Alexander's video down below. And I think he's right. I think this was part of the speech, and it turned very, very poorly against them. They didn't expect it to turn out this way. They thought that this would be Biden's JFK moment, and boy, were they wrong. And now you see them walking it back. You see Blinken coming out with a statement saying, well, he didn't mean what he said, and we don't want regime change in Russia. I mean, you know, he had to give an entire statement about this. You heard Psaki and the White House come out with statements as well. And you have Liz Truss and Blinken, both of them, coordinating their statements yesterday and saying the way out of this for Russia is for them to surrender. That's what they said. For them to change their behavior. This is Blinken, and I quote, Russia needs to change its behavior. The behavior, I definitely quote. I don't know. I think he said change their behavior. But they definitely use the word behavior. Blinken and Liz Truss, the foreign minister of the UK and the Secretary of State for the US. They said that all of these sanctions and all of this, these devastating sanctions is the word they use, and this pain, this economic pain that has been inflicted on Russia, this can all be turned back if Russia capitulates. My God, my English is terrible in the morning. Capitulates. So if Russia capitulates and if they surrender, then the sanctions will be rolled back and the pain will stop. Isn't that nice of Liz Truss and Anthony Blinken? And you know that if Russia were to do such a thing, which they won't, but if they were to do such a thing, you know those sanctions would not be turned back. They would actually be turned up, because we know how these psychopaths think. First of all, there's no reason for Russia to capitulate or surrender because they're winning. But even if they were, why would they believe that the sanctions would be rolled back? They never are. When have sanctions ever been rolled back? In the history of time, never. Never. The only instance where the sanctions may actually be rolled back is in the case of Iran and Venezuela, because the U.S. now needs their oil. Because the U.S. needs the oil that Venezuela and Iran has in order to offset the embargo of oil from Russia. They may actually turn back those sanctions on Iran and Venezuela. And by the way, we are close to a deal with Iran for the JCPOA and the nuclear deal. We're very, very close. And boy, is the United States just itching to get this deal done, because they need that Iranian oil in order to offset the embargo on Russia. But I'm sure the Russians have game planned this with Iran, and they game planned everything with Venezuela, and everything is being coordinated. They know what the U.S. is up to. I mean, we all know what the U.S. is up to and why they're talking about removing sanctions on the Maduro government or on Iran, because, you know, they shot themselves in the foot with this oil embargo placed against Russia. Anyway, so you have Liz Truss and Anthony Blinken talking about Russia's behavior and pretty much telling the Kremlin, they're telling Putin, surrender, and then we'll stop this pain. And you know that's not what they're going to do if Russia were to even think about capitulating and rolling back its military operation. You know that the U.S. and the U.K. would then go full speed into regime change in Russia. I mean, they would just go full speed. But anyway, there's no, you know, the Kremlin's not going to take this seriously, because they're winning. They're winning on the ground. And while no one really knows what their overall objective is, outside of the demilitarization and denazification, which they've stated, we really don't know what that means as far as, you know, what's going to happen to Ukraine or to the areas that the Russians have so far captured. And the mop-up is still going on in Mariupol, but it's going really well from what I understand. It was brutal fighting, really, really brutal fighting, but that city is, for all intents and purposes, in Russia's control. And we're waiting for the second phase to begin. What that means is anyone's guess, but I think it's pretty safe to say that the second phase will include the dealing with these 60,000 Azov guys in the cauldron in Donbass. So I think that we can say is definite, that the Russians are going to deal with them, the Russian military. And so we had a terrible weekend of news coming from the events on the ground in Ukraine, specifically two bits of news that went viral, that are going viral as we speak. One was the video of the Ukraine NAZIs torturing and killing and shooting Russian POWs. That went viral. And then we have Patrick Lancaster, who's a reporter on the ground. I believe Patrick is American. I'm not sure, but if you guys know in the comments down below, let me know. I think he's American, but he's a fantastic journalist. I mean, the guy's just got absolute courage, absolute courage. He's on the ground, and he was in school number 25 in Mariupol. And, now he's starting to report everything that's going on in Mariupol. So Patrick Lancaster is really our eyes and our ears as to what was going on in Mariupol now that it's been taken by the Russian military. They're allowing Patrick to record everything that's going on. And you just had a horrific story of torture that was taking place in School 25, where they had a woman who was dead on the ground, killed, tortured, and she had a swastika painted on her. And it was just I don't really have any comments on any of this because it's so horrific. I really think that what I'll do is I'll put a link to a video on Viva Frey's channel where he's speaking with Robert Barnes, and I'll put a timestamp to that as well because they did a live stream. And to be honest, Robert I think does an absolute incredible job of explaining the war crimes that are taking place in Ukraine on behalf of Zelensky and his NAZI goons, death squad. Absolute evil forces that are operating in Ukraine and that are being funded by the European Union, the US, Canada, Greece, being funded by Greece, the Greeks, a country that was occupied by the NAZIs, is funding this horror that is taking place in Ukraine. They're funding and supporting this horror that is taking place in Ukraine. It's despicable. But I'll put a link to Robert's explanation of things because I don't really have much more to add to it because he just does such a good job of putting everything into frame and into context. And all these people that are, and I think Robert actually uses the word, that are clapping like seals for Zelensky. Boy, are you on the wrong side of history. Anyway, I will leave it there. I'll make another interesting note about Mariupol that I was thinking about, and it has to do with Greece. Real devastation happened in Mariupol. I mean, it was a furious, ferocious battle that took place in Mariupol, and thank God for Patrick who's showing it to us. But we're starting to get reports, and we've been getting reports from a lot of the Greek Ukrainians that were caught up in this battle, and they were being used as human shields, and they're testifying to the fact that it was the AZOV, the Azov NAZIs. I have to spell out these words for the algorithms and the YouTube algorithms and all this nonsense. It's incredible. I have to get around the YouTube algorithms as I do these videos because they're also protecting these satanic forces. It's incredible what's happening in the world today. It is absolutely incredible. But anyway, so these Greeks were, they're going on TV channels and they're saying, thank God the Russians came and liberated us. And these Azov guys were shooting us in the back and they weren't letting us leave and they were terrorizing us. And, the Greek media channels who are also, paid for and bought off by the Brussels retrograde and the Brussels elite, they're bought off and paid for. They're in shock and they're trying to, say new segment, cut this guy off, get this guy off the channel. But he's there, he's speaking, and he's telling the Greek people exactly what was going on in Mariupol. And they're not having these people on anymore, by the way. These Greeks that are in Mariupol because they were speaking truth, and the Greek media can't have this. They can't have the truth get out. It'll spoil the narrative, and it'll damage the Greek government. But the Greek government, that's in the bag for the EU. I mean, they are completely in the bag with the EU, and they kiss the ring of van der Leyen. But anyway, it's a different video for a different time. But I was thinking, even with all the destruction and the fighting that was going on in Mariupol, the Russians still didn't destroy a lot of the essential infrastructure. You still had Greeks with internet in Mariupol, with internet, with mobile, and they were able to to tell the Greeks living in Greece what was going on. And these are Greeks, people of Greek heritage who still speak Greek that are obviously Ukraine citizens. But there's a big community, a big diaspora in Mariupol of Greek descendants who live there. And they speak Russian and they speak Greek. And they were telling the world that, guys, it is the Azov guys, it is the Zelensky regime that are terrorizing and torturing us. And they're doing it all on their mobile phones and on their internet. And I think that says a lot. That even though the Russians had to go in neighborhood by neighborhood, building by building, into the center of Mariupol to clear out these Azov forces, ferocious fighting, dangerous fighting, they still avoided taking out a lot of the essential infrastructure for the people that were stuck there to survive. I mean, there were people that were stuck in their apartments and being held hostage, and the Russians didn't want to go in as hard as they could have in Mariupol, and destroy the sewage and the water and the internet and the telephony. They still kept that intact. It says a lot, in my opinion. So we have that bit of news. And finally, the last thing I want to say in this video is with regards to what was going on in NagornoKarabakh with Azerbaijan and also Georgia. And what we had over the weekend is we had Azerbaijan moving in to NagornoKarabakh, and there was a war there about like a year ago. There was a war that was fought in that area, in this disputed area between Azerbaijan and Armenia, depending on what side you're on. Disputed. I'm just saying that for simplicity, so that we don't go too deep into the actual conflict between Armenia and Azerbaijan. Anyway, there was a war there, and Russia came in, and they brought in what they call peacekeepers. They brought in their military to stabilize the situation and to stop the fighting. And Azerbaijan moved into Nagorno-Karabakh over the weekend. And as they were moving in with their military, the Russians told Azerbaijan, don't do it. And Iran sent a warning to Azerbaijan, and they said, don't do it. If you move any further into Nagorno-Karabakh, Iran is going to go in and they're going to push you back. And from what I understand, Iran forces have retreated. They've moved back to their previous positions. And so Iran's warning worked. And we don't have a second front here because it was very dangerous. Another war taking place right now would be the spark that would be needed for a type of World War III scenario to take place. A second or third front with regards to Ukraine. So Iran sent the warning, and Russia sent the warning, and then Iran sent the warning, and war was averted. So in a way, Iran prevented a worldwide catastrophe. They sent a stern warning. They weren't bluffing, and Azerbaijan pulled back. Now, what influence Turkey had on this move, and what influence the U.S. had on Turkey in order to get Azerbaijan to make this move, I don't know. Because Azerbaijan, they do have very good relations with Russia. So I just don't know what was at play there. I don't know if it was just Azerbaijan saying, maybe now that Russia is preoccupied with Ukraine, we can gain some more territory, gain an advantage vis-a-vis Armenia, or if this was some sort of NATO, Turkey move towards Azerbaijan to get them to open up a second front. And I say that it could have been some sort of influence from forces in Turkey or forces in NATO to get Azerbaijan to open up a second front, because we had a Ukraine official on TV yesterday pleading with Georgia to open up a second front against Russia. In other words, this Ukraine official, and I forgot his name, but a very high up official, was calling on Georgia to essentially declare a war against Russia, to open up a second front. So you know that a second front is on their mind. They want a second front to be open. Obviously, Georgia has stayed out of the conflict. They've refused to impose sanctions on Russia. They haven't bought into the narrative. and they've kind of stayed out of this one. And they said they're not going to open up a second front, by the way. They're not that crazy. You also had a Polish general who talked about Poland entering Kaliningrad. So, you know, these forces, these evil forces that want World War III, they're poking around trying to find a second front in and around Russia in order to get things moving for a wider conflict. Once again, what is the goal? To destabilize and destroy Russia. And now that Russia is winning in Ukraine, and they were winning from day one, but now that it's becoming very clear that what they're doing in Ukraine is going exactly as planned, it's becoming very clear now that things are going as planned in Ukraine for Russia. You can see that that NATO and the globalists, Brussels, DC, London, they're poking around to find a second front. You know, they want a wider conflict. They want escalation at all costs. And so I thought that was an interesting comment about Georgia entering the war. And by the way, there's a lot of talk about the chemical weapons and the false flag. I just want to throw it out there. We are all expecting some sort of chemical false flag. I think it's clear. It's very, very clear. I heard Viva when he was talking during his live stream. He said he was working out at the gym, and he had to watch Fox News, and he had to watch Marco Rubio speak out on a Fox News segment. And he said that Rubio, let me cross here. He said that Rubio was also talking about a chemical weapons attack in Ukraine. So he was also throwing it out there. So you know some sort of chemical false flag is coming. We all know it. But I just want to throw one thing in there. It might not be a chemical attack. You know, this could also be some sort of head fake, because they're talking about chemical. It may be something else. You know, it may be something connected to Zelensky. It may be some other type of attack. You know, God forbid it may be some sort of, MH17 thing. And I say that, God forbid. I don't want any of this stuff to happen. I don't want a chemical false flag. I don't want an MH17. I don't want something to happen to Zelensky. I really don't. I don't want anything like that to happen, because that would mean escalation. But while they're talking about a chemical attack, keep in mind that it could be something, you know, not related to a chemical attack, and it may be some sort of head fake. And you still get the same result, though. You still get some sort of escalation and some NATO involvement. So I just wanted to throw that out there, that we need to keep our eyes and ears open, because while we're looking for a chemical attack, for a false flag, it may be something else. You know, the deep state and the globalists, they're very, very clever. Very clever. So let's just be aware and keep our eyes and ears open. Anyway, that is the video, guys. TheDuran.locals.com. I will put the links to Alexander's video. I'll put the links to the Viva Freight live stream with the Robert Barnes. And you're just going to get all kinds of great information from those two videos and streams. All right. TheDuran.locals.com. I am going to grab a coffee, not a KFC. Even though I'm in front of a KFC, I'm going to grab a coffee actually right over there and get this video up. All right. Take care.